Last time, on Blind Date, Carrie just got the news from his father. Donald has escaped. For the first time, Carrie realized he didn't know where his brother was. Lieutenant Hart had no choice. He had to tell Carrie something about what happened. His father told him that him, Donald, and Donald's girlfriend all went out for a late-night drive one night. That night, they were all in a bad crash. Donald and Carrie made it out all right, but Donald's girlfriend was killed in the accident. The death of Donald's girlfriend was too much for him to handle. He snapped and lost it. Donald had been sent away to a mental hospital. Carrie couldn't believe what he was hearing. That's the reason he had been having strange vision of car headlights. Just before his father leaves the house, Carrie stops him and asks what was the name of Donald's girlfriend. His father tells him that her name was Amanda. On the night of the dance, Carrie met up with Mandy in the school parking lot. Carrie noticed that she was a little overdressed for a school dance, almost as if she was wearing someone else's outfit. As they entered the gym, Carrie meets up with Josh and his date Jesse. Carrie finally introduces Mandy and Josh. The couples go their separate ways, and Carrie and Mandy begin to dance. Carrie's feeling a little on edge at the dance. He's nervous about running into the guys from the football team. After dancing for a little while, Mandy makes a move, pushing Carrie back against the wall and kissing him aggressively, forcefully. Carrie was caught off guard by the kiss. After their long kiss, Mandy runs back into the crowd of dancers. Carrie tries to follow her, but loses her in the crowd. As he searches for her, he ends up leaving the gym and begins to wander the dark halls of the school. Carrie thinks he's hearing voices and footsteps. He moves towards the sounds, but Carrie is surprised when he runs into Malik and O'Brien. He immediately runs. Carrie knew he should have stayed in the gym where he was safe. He tries to hide and look for a way to escape, but Malik and O'Brien caught him while he was hiding. They told Carrie to calm down and relax. They only wanted to apologize for what happened. They told him Sal finally woke up from his coma, and told him that Carrie didn't mean to break his leg. The whole thing was an accident. Feeling relieved, Carrie ran back to the gym. He finally found Mandy waiting by the refreshment table. She asked him why he ran off and left her, but Carrie knew it was her who disappeared on him. After the dance, Carrie and Mandy made their way into the parking lot. But when Carrie gets to his car, he finds all the tires slashed to shreds and the windows are all busted in. Carrie can't believe what he's seeing. Moments after finding the car, Josh and his date Jesse find Carrie and Mandy in the parking lot and offer to give them both a ride home. But Mandy starts acting real strange and refuses the offer and runs to catch a bus as it passes by. Carrie felt a little on edge when Josh dropped him off at his house. He went to the phone to call his dad about the car, but as he got to the phone, he received another threatening phone call. Carrie was about to say something, but he quickly realized that this wasn't Sharon calling him. It was someone else, and whoever it was knew about what happened to the car. Afterwards, Carrie got a hold of his father and told him he needed him to come home. He was surprised at how calm his dad acted over the situation. Carrie was relieved. As he and his father spoke, the phone began to ring again. Carrie asked his dad if he could answer it. It was Mandy. Carrie took the call up to his room. She apologized for running off on him after the dance. Then she asked him if they could meet up and have lunch tomorrow since there was no school that day. The next morning, Lieutenant Hart gave Carrie some insurance forms that needed to be turned in for the car before he meets up with Mandy. After dropping off the insurance forms, Carrie bumps into someone on the street. It's Margot, the girl who set Carrie up with Mandy. After their greeting and a brief conversation to catch up on things, Carrie decides to thank Margot for hooking him up with Mandy, but Margot doesn't seem to have the slightest clue of what he's talking about. Carrie begins to ask multiple questions about Mandy, but she says she doesn't know any Mandy and definitely hasn't set up any blind dates for him. Now Carrie's beginning to feel like something strange is going on. He knows for sure that Mandy told him it was Margot that gave her his number. Carrie needed to get to the bottom of this. He decided he would confront Mandy about it during their lunch. Carrie sat and waited at the place where they agreed to meet up, but Mandy never showed up. Chapter 13. The phone was ringing when he got home. Hi, Carrie. I'm sorry, I got hung up. Mandy, I tried to call you, but information had no listing. Didn't have any listing at all for Lawrence. There was a short silence. That's because the phone must be in my mom's name, she said unconvincingly. Or was Carrie just becoming suspicious of everyone and everything? Frances, that's her name. She doesn't always use my dad's name. Oh, I see. Where were you? I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to talk to you, too. All of the soft sexiness was gone from her voice now. She sounded anxious, worried. I really wanted to, listen. How about tonight? I don't know. I don't have a car. Dad doesn't like me to. I can get a car, she said quickly. I'll pick you up at 7:30, okay? We'll just drive around. We'll cruise Main Street, you know, like in the movies. He laughed. You just want to park, he said. I know you're kind. I might, she said, her teasing voice back. You might be talking me into this, he said, cheering up. So what if Margot hadn't fixed them up, he thought to himself. She was still terrific. She was about the only thing that was going right for him. So I'll pick you up at 7:30? You've got a date, he said. When he hung up the phone, he had a broad smile on his face. I don't know what you're smiling about, Lieutenant Hart said, walking into the kitchen, grabbing a handful of cookies from an open bag and stuffing them into his mouth 2 at a time. He began to speak with his mouth full of cookies. What? Carrie asked. His father swallowed. The car is going to cost more than $600. Have some more cookies, Carrie said. They sat down at the kitchen table and had a long talk. Carrie told him just about everything that had happened to him since the accident on the practice field that had broken Sal's leg. He started slowly, reluctantly, not sure how much he wanted to reveal, how much of the pain, how much of the fear he wanted to share with his father. But then it all came out in a torrent of words. The threats, the phone calls late at night, the practical jokes, the friends who no longer talked to him, the beating on the basketball court, everything. His father rubbed the bridge of his nose with his fingers, closed his eyes, tilted back the kitchen chair. Every once in a while, he'd make a note, jotting a few words in a fast scribble on a small white pad. A few times, he shook his head wearily, as if to say, "These kids today." Carrie told him everything that had happened, except for his growing relationship with Mandy. Somehow he felt that to include that with all of the horrors of the past few weeks, that would be to taint it, to ruin it in some way. He needed to keep the one good thing happening to him private. He had to keep it separate and clean. Who's this girl who called last night? This Mandy? His father asked. Lieutenant Hart was not a bad policeman. He never let a detail slip by him. Carrie smiled, impressed. She was a blind date. She lives on Sizemore. Her family just moved here. She just started at Revere. She's okay. I kind of like her. You gonna see her again? His father jotted something down. Yeah, tonight. Lieutenant Hart frowned. He probably shouldn't go out much at night for a while. Not until we figure out who's been doing all this. The threat of not being able to see Mandy made Carrie angry. Well, Dad, I can't just pull a shell over my head like a turtle. I didn't mean that. I just think... Well, we're only going to drive around. We're not going anywhere, Carrie said, sounding childish and knowing it. Only going to drive around, huh? His father laughed. He pulled himself up to his feet. Well, I don't know. You can get into an awful lot of trouble without getting out of the car, you know, fella. He laughed again. Carrie could feel his face turning red. He never liked it when his dad teased him about sex. I gotta go into the station, Lieutenant Hart said, looking for his cap. We've got a real problem here, Carrie. This has all gone beyond the teenage prank stage. I don't know how seriously we should take the death threats from this girl on the phone. Probably not serious at all, but you never know. It wouldn't hurt to play it safe. Lay low for a while we flush this person or persons out. He found the cap on the mantel and pulled it down onto his bald head. I know you're not going to like this, but I've got to get the school involved in the investigation. Dad! Carrie stopped before he began. He knew there was no way he could stop his father, and his father was right. He'd had enough of the threats and the fear. He was happy that his dad was getting involved in this. He nodded and didn't say anything. Lieutenant Hart put a hand on Carrie's shoulder, then headed toward the door and his patrol car. Be careful, son. Yeah, sure, Dad. Thanks. Call me for any reason, okay? Yeah, okay. The door slammed. Carrie sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chair that had just held his father. He felt a little better. Somehow it made him feel more secure, just having told the details to his father. He felt secure for nearly a minute. Then the phone rang. The fear jumped back into his chest. He let it ring. Again. Again. He began to shake. This is crazy. He had to answer it. He couldn't live in terror of the telephone. He picked up the receiver and lifted it slowly to his ear. Hello? There was loud static at the other end, the sound you hear from payphones on crowded street corners. Hello? Carrie repeated. Carrie? He recognized the voice immediately, even though he hadn't heard it in over a year. Carrie, this is Donald. Donald? Carrie's voice came out weak and small. His hand was trembling so hard he could barely hold the receiver. Carrie, be careful. I'm coming. Slam. What happened? Oh no, Carrie thought. He had accidentally hung up. Without thinking, he had slammed down the receiver, his heart pounding in his chest. He sat and stared at the phone, waiting for Donald to call back. But he didn't. Those words, Donald's words, were they meant to be reassuring? Be careful. I'm coming. Why did they sound like a threat? Chapter 14. It got dark so early in the fall. By 5:30 the sun was down behind the hills. By 7:30 it was as black as midnight, and the air was cold and heavy with frost. Carrie stood at the living room window, staring into the blackness, waiting for Mandy, thinking about Donald. A straight black cloud, narrow as a ribbon, floated across the moon, cutting it into 2 half-moons. Normally, he wouldn't have even noticed it, but tonight he was looking for signs of strangeness, omens of what was to happen. He felt uncomfortable, out of place in his own body. He wasn't an emotional person. Ask anyone. They'd describe him as easygoing, maybe even bland. Donald had always been the one for tantrums and emotional scenes, long heated arguments that ended in screaming and tears. Not Carrie. He'd walk away from any kind of dispute or make a joke, but tonight he felt different. He kept having the urge to cry. Then it would disappear and he'd feel really happy, too happy. He was on an emotional roller coaster, and as 7:30 drew near, the ride went faster. The emotions changed more rapidly. Guess I'm just tired, he told himself. At 7:45, Mandy pulled up the hill and honked her horn. He stared out the window at the car she was driving. It was a brand new Pontiac Firebird. The 2 halves of the divided moon reflected off the shiny hood. He jogged out of the house, letting the screen door slam behind him. She pushed open the car door, and the light came on inside. He saw that the car was black with bright red interior, shiny red leather bucket seats, and a red dashboard. Well, I'm impressed, he said, leaning into the car and rubbing his hand over the leather seat back. Doesn't take much to impress you, does it? She said, grabbing his arm and pulling him down onto the low bucket seat. She squeezed his hand and held on to it. I hope you don't spend the whole night talking about the car. You haven't even looked at me. I'm jealous already. He looked at her. She was wearing jeans and a big wool poncho, a furry, loose-fitting poncho with 60s-style fringe all down the front. I like your, sweater thing, he said, pulling on a strand of fringe. Really? I made it. She smiled, pleased at the compliment. Must have taken a long time, he said. I had a long time, she said, her smile fading. So where'd you get this boss car? She leaned forward, put the car into drive, and began to turn it around. Listen, I'm really sorry about this afternoon. Hope you didn't wait too long. Oh no, only an hour and a half, he said, a little of his anger at being stood up returning. Oh, I feel terrible. She gave him a devilish smile and put a hand just above his left knee. Maybe I can make it up to you. He smiled. Maybe I'll let you. I was on my way to meet you, but, well, it's sort of a long story. Where do you want to go? I don't know. We don't have much choice, do we? Around here you can either drive through town or drive through the hills. Let's drive through town and then through the hills, she said. Okay, I'm game. He scooted down in the seat. The leather felt smooth and cold. The car hummed softly as she pointed it down the sloping road toward town. The heater was turned on high. The warm air blowing up at him made him feel comfortable, happy, even a little drowsy. Tell me your long story, he said, not letting her off the hook. She frowned and bit her lower lip. With her blonde hair flowing free to her shoulders, and in that old-fashioned woolly poncho, she really did look like someone from another time. There was something sad about her, he suddenly thought. Then he realized it was probably his emotional roller coaster plunging over another steep hill. Why was he going up and down like that? I don't want to, she said, a bit annoyed. I'll force you to, he said, teasing. How will you do that? I'll tickle you. She smiled. I'm not ticklish. Everyone is ticklish, somewhere, he said, trying to make it sound dirty. I'm not, she said, still smiling. Oh! She swerved the car. It hit a bump and bounced over a ditch. She pulled the wheel back and got them back on the road. It was an animal, she said. It ran right under the tires. Yuck. Carrie's heart was pounding. Forget about the tickling, he said. I'm not doing any tickling while you're driving. Are you okay? Yeah, I guess so. She leaned forward, staring intently out at the dark road. There were no streetlights in this section of the hills, and the road curved steeply as it made its way down toward town. "Did you see it? What was it?" "It looked like an elephant," he said. "Maybe we should go somewhere. Maybe you don't want to spend the whole evening behind the wheel." "No," she protested quickly. "No, really. I like to drive. I'd rather just stay in the car tonight and talk. Well, maybe I will tell you why I didn't meet you this afternoon. I don't know. I can't decide." "It sounds pretty heavy," he said. She hit another bump. He felt the tire skid over the pebbly asphalt. "Hey, slow down." "Oh, sorry. Gee, I was doing 65. Doesn't feel like it in this car." She suddenly seemed very nervous. She peered into the rearview mirror. It was black. "You must think I've been acting a little weird lately," she said, easing her foot off the gas. "Well, I mean, you don't really know me or anything, so maybe you think I'm just weird, but..." "That's it," Carrie said. "That's what I think." He meant it as a joke, but she took it seriously. "Well, I don't blame you. I've been a little strange-o, but there's a reason. I wasn't going to tell you about it. I mean, you've got enough problems." "That's an understatement," he said. "I don't know if it's fair for me to add any more, but I also don't want you to think I'm nuts or something. There is a reason why why I didn't show up and why..." She was silent for a long moment. They stopped at the traffic light at the bottom of the hill. There were no cars around, but they waited for the long red light to change. Then she started moving slowly. The road was flat and straight now. The wooded hills gave way to neat, orderly suburban houses. "Well, I realize this is going to make me seem even more nuts," she said, staring straight ahead, lowering her voice until it was nearly a whisper. "But I know I'm not. I know this is true. It's just that..." "What is it?" Carrie said impatiently. He was immediately sorry he hadn't covered his impatience. He could see that she was really upset and finding it difficult to tell him the reason. "Well, I think someone's been following me. I know it." They turned the corner onto Wellmore and drove past the elementary school. All of the lights were on, but the school was deserted. "Why?" Carrie asked. "Who would follow you?" "I don't know why," she said. Then she hesitated for a long time. "But I think I know who." "Well, come on," he said impatiently. "Who?" She turned her head to look him in the eye. "Donald. Your brother Donald." The car bumped against the curve, narrowly missing a parked car. "Mandy, watch the road," he cried. "Sorry," she said, frowning, turning the wheel hard to the left. "Why would my brother be following you?" Carrie asked. As he asked the question, Donald's voice on the phone came back to him. "Be careful. I'm coming." "I told you. I don't know why," she said shrilly. "Be careful. I'm coming." Why on earth would Donald be following Mandy? Was he coming after both of them? "This is getting too bizarre," Carrie said. "I knew you'd think I'm nuts," she said dejectedly. She turned onto Sycamore. "I don't think you're nuts," he said. "I think the world is nuts. Donald called me tonight and said..." Then he stopped. A thought burst into his mind. "Hey, how do you know my brother Donald?" The question seemed to fluster her. She stared straight out the windshield, squinting her deep blue eyes as an oncoming car cast its yellow headlights at them. "I didn't say I knew your brother," she said finally. "I just said he was following me. At least I think he is following me." Her answer didn't really satisfy him. He started to repeat his question. Then he realized they were driving past the house on Sycamore. The house he had thought was hers. Amanda's house. Was she deliberately slowing down as they drove past the house? No, it can't be possible. Then why was she driving so slowly? And why did she have that weird, distant smile on her face? He glanced at the house, completely dark, completely deserted looking. He knew the sad couple was inside. He saw their faces again, their looks of horror when they recognized him. "Oh, why, Carrie, you got so pale. What's the matter?" Was she mocking him? Was she being sarcastic? No. "Stop it, Carrie," he told himself. He was starting to be suspicious of everyone. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't. She turned right onto Hickory. The school was a few blocks down. "Nothing," he told her. "I'm okay." The sad faces of Amanda's parents stayed with him. Why had she driven down Sycamore? "That's why I disappeared for a while at the dance Sunday night," she said, breaking into his morbid thoughts. "I thought I saw Donald in the gym." "But that's impossible," Carrie cried. But he realized it wasn't impossible.
Then I thought he was watching us in the parking lot. That's why I ran for the bus." "You saw him there?" "You actually saw him there?" Carrie asked, not wanting to believe any of it. "Well, I didn't really see him, only his shadow." She shook her shoulders, a violent shiver. It made him feel bad that he was questioning her so suspiciously. "When I went into town to meet you this afternoon, I saw the same shadow," she said. "I turned around, but there was no one there. I guess he didn't want me to see him, but I knew he was there. I knew." She bit her purple lips nervously. "So you were at the restaurant? You were at Phil's?" "Outside it, but he was right behind me. I ran. I got back into the car. I had to get away from him. I was so scared." Her shoulders began to shake violently up and down. He put a hand on her shoulder to calm her. "Let's stop talking about it now," he said softly, soothingly. "Drive up into the South Hills. We'll park by the point and talk." "Talk? At the point?" She gave him a sly smile. "Yeah, talk," he said. "For a while, anyway." He laughed. But he didn't really feel like laughing. They rode in silence up through the low hills. The moon was completely covered by clouds now. Even though it was still early, there were few cars on the road. After a while, the silence began to make him feel uncomfortable. Everything was making him uncomfortable tonight. He struggled to think of something to say, a new subject, something different to talk about. He squinted. The car coming toward them had its brights on. The bright white beams of light were blinding against the deep black of the night. "I ran into Margot in town. She said she didn't know you," he said. Why had he said it? He wasn't going to mention it. It had just slipped out in his eagerness to say something. "Hey, Mandy! No! Look out!" She swerved the car toward the center of the road, into the path of the oncoming car. Chapter 15. The headlights burned into his eyes until all he could see was a shadowless glare of white. He heard the crunch of metal against metal, the scattering and cracking of glass. Then he felt the jolt. The impact threw him hard against the side of the car. The white glare became black, then flared white again. A stab of pain crossed the side of his head. He cried out. For some reason there was a second jolt, a second slam against the hard car side, a second stab of pain. He heard the steady whir of a tire spinning in the air. He heard glass, pieces of glass hitting the road, cracking. He heard quiet sobs. The side of his head felt wet, warm wetness. Blood? He opened his eyes. The headlights were still in his eyes. Would he ever see again? Would he have the blinding whiteness in his eyes forever? He tried to speak, but he could only gasp. His throat felt tight and clogged. He coughed. He tried to cough his throat clear. "Hey." He could speak. The pain in his side spread around his body. His head throbbed. He reached a hand up. It was blood. His head was bleeding. Shadows emerged. He began to see. He tried to lean forward. The pain was too intense. The shadows darkened. A night reappeared. He could see again. He could see that the car was tilted. Lights from the other car, the car they had collided with, threw a steady white light onto the front seat. He looked over at the girl. She was leaning forward at a funny angle. He gasped. He choked. Her head had gone through the windshield. He called her name. "Amanda." He pulled her arm. He pulled her head back into the car. Her wide eyes stared back at him sightlessly. Her mouth fell open. She was dead. No, no, no. Amanda was dead. Donald. What about Donald? "Donald," he called to him. "What?" He leaned past the dead girl and saw his brother. Donald shook his head. He was alive. His window, the window on the right side of the car, was open. Donald stuck his head out the window, gasping for air, sucking in the cool night air. Donald was alive. "Donald," Carrie said, blood dripping down his head onto his neck. "Yeah, I'm here." "Amanda," Carrie started to say. Donald didn't know yet. Donald didn't know that his girlfriend was dead. Only Carrie knew. Only Carrie. Carrie pushed at the wheel in front of him. "Amanda?" Donald said. "She's dead," Carrie told him. He heard the whir of the spinning tire. "No," Donald said. "She's dead," Carrie said through his throbbing pain, through the white glare that curtained his eyes again, through the blood, through the nausea that was rising from his stomach. "She's dead, and it's all my fault." "Whoa, that was a close one," Mandy said. She pulled over and stopped by the side of the road. "I don't know what happened. I guess my hand just slipped on the wheel." Carrie waited for his heart to stop pounding, waited for the white glare to fade from his eyes. He was sweating, he realized, a cold, wet sweat. His clothing felt drenched. "Lucky that guy swerved in time. We would have bought it," Mandy said, shaking her head. "Are you okay?" Carrie didn't answer her. He had seen it all. He had seen it in the glare of the oncoming headlights. His memory had come back. That night, that dreadful night of horror had come back. "Carrie, what's the matter? Are you okay?" Mandy's voice was far, far away. It was a year ago. Amanda, Donald, and he were riding in the hills. He saw it all. He remembered it. He knew it. They crashed, collided head-on with a big Buick. The Buick had overturned. He remembered the sound of its tires whirring in the air. Donald was okay, just stunned. He had been cut, but not badly. He had a concussion. And Amanda was dead. "Oh my God, no!" Carrie screamed at the top of his lungs. Mandy shrieked, reached forward, grabbed him by the shoulders. "Carrie, what? What? We're okay. We didn't crash," she cried. Amanda was dead. He saw it now. He saw it so clearly. He saw it all. He heard it. He smelled it. Smelled the blood, the burning rubber, smelled the horror. Amanda was dead, and it was all his fault. He saw it so clearly his side ached and his head throbbed, and he felt it all over again. It was all his fault, because he was the driver. He slowly became aware that Mandy was shaking him by the shoulders. "She can shake me, but she can't shake away the memories," he thought. "Carrie, come on. It's okay, Carrie, please. It's okay. Stop. You're scaring me." "Mandy, you can stop. Stop shaking me." He pulled himself up in the smooth leather seat. He looked around. The moon reappeared behind them, pale and full, reassuring somehow. There was no one around. The other driver had yelled something out his window, shook his fist at Mandy, and had roared away. "Carrie, you scared me," Mandy said, sounding cross. "We only had a close call, you know. You don't have to go into shock." "Sorry," he muttered. How could he explain to her what had just happened? How could he tell her that an entire section of his life, a terrifying, heartbreaking section that had been missing for more than a year, had just come back to him? He couldn't. No way. "Mandy, someday," he said. He tried to sound too dramatic. "Someday I'll tell you what just happened to me. It's a long, long story, and not a happy one. But now I think we'd better skip the point. I'm not going to be very good company. I think we'd better call it a night." "You want me to take you home?" She pouted again, but her eyes, those clear blue eyes, were filled with sympathy. She seemed to understand. "Okay," she said softly, patting his hand. "I'm really a good driver. I don't understand. I really can't explain now. It wasn't that." He suddenly felt weary, too weary to talk. He rested his head in his hands. They drove back through town. They didn't say much. The car hummed quietly. Trees bent and rustled in the strong autumn wind. He looked up. To his surprise, she had turned back onto Sycamore Street. "Hey, Mandy." They were driving slowly past Amanda's house. He remembered the house clearly now. Remembered Amanda's parents. Remembered hanging out in the basement rec room with Amanda and Donald. Remembered everything. A flood of memories that took place inside this house. What are we doing on Sycamore? Was she doing this to him deliberately? It wasn't possible, was it? "I don't know. This is the way I always go. What street should I take?" She seemed totally innocent. Carrie felt terribly guilty for suspecting her. Guilty. He had a year of feeling guilty to catch up on. He had been the driver. He had killed Amanda. He had killed Donald's girlfriend. No wonder he had wiped the memory from his mind, shut it away for an entire year. No wonder Donald was coming to get him now. "Be careful. I'm coming." "You should take Edgemont. It's faster," he snapped at Mandy. She looked startled. "Sorry, I didn't realize you were in such a big hurry to be rid of me." She stared straight ahead, not looking at him. "That's not what I meant." They rode the rest of the way without speaking. Every few minutes he'd lift his head from his hands and look over at her. She looked so pretty. It was nice to have one nice thing happening in his life. But what was that expression on her face? Why was she driving with that smile? That pleased smile. What was she so pleased about? Chapter 16. He went right up to his room and tried to go to sleep, but he was wide awake. He stared at the shifting shadows of tree branches cast by the moon onto the low ceiling, shadows that beaconed, shadows that disturbed the night's stillness, and made Carrie feel as if he were moving beneath them, moving through the year he had misplaced. He had remembered the night clearly now, also a breezy night of shifting shadows. He remembered the three of them hanging out in Amanda's rec room, Donald lying on the billiards table, while Carrie and Amanda had to shoot around him. Amanda's mom brought them tall glasses of iced tea. No, lemonade. It was bitter, terribly bitter, but they drank it anyway, making hilarious faces, trying to outgross each other. No, wait. Donald poured his into the rubber tree plant. That's right. Then they went for a drive up in the South Hills. Whose idea was it anyway? Donald's? No, Amanda's. She always wanted to get away from her home. They were so happy, so silly. Donald and Amanda never seemed to mind if Carrie tagged along. At least, Carrie never noticed it. They made him very happy. It always made him happy to be with Donald, doing things that Donald did. So they went for a drive. Carrie asked if he could drive. He was only 15, not old enough, but sometimes Donald let him drive, just for laughs. Just for laughs. Ha. Donald pulled over. Amanda protested. He teased her. He got out of the car, walked across the hood, doing a balancing act like he was on a high wire. Carrie got behind the wheel. Donald took Carrie's place, riding shotgun. Donald took Carrie's place. Donald was sent away, but Carrie wasn't. Donald took Carrie's place, but Carrie was the driver. Why wasn't Carrie sent away? Why was Donald the one who got punished? Lying in bed, staring up at the twisting shadows, Carrie realized there was still a piece missing, still a part he didn't remember. Was that why Donald was coming after him now? Because the wrong brother got punished for the crime? Carrie got behind the wheel. It was dark in the hills, and he was going too fast. He didn't really have control, but he was too scared to tell Donald. He didn't like to be laughed at, especially not by Donald, especially not in front of Amanda. And then they crashed, and Amanda died, blood all over. He pulled her head back into the car and saw her eyes. Her eyes, they looked so surprised. And then he screamed, and then the piece was missing. What happened then? What happened next? When did you get in last night? His father looked and sounded tired. He sucked on his coffee cup as if it was a matter of life or death. Early. Carrie didn't really feel like talking. Should he tell him that Donald had called? Probably, but he just didn't have the strength. You and this Mandy getting pretty serious? Carrie looked up, surprised. His father usually didn't ask such personal questions. No, not really. He poured milk over his cornflakes and sat down across from his father. Dad, I'm starting to get my memory back. He didn't intend to tell him this morning. Why did he start? I can remember the accident, the whole night. Most of it anyway. Lieutenant Hart put the coffee cup down gently. He put both hands on the edge of the table, grasping the table as if for support. That's good, Carrie. Maybe you should go see the doctor after school. Dr. Kessel. Carrie had seen her 3 times a week for nearly 8 months after the accident. She was a nice lady, a good listener. He had forgotten all about her, shut her out of his memory. Yeah, maybe, he said. It isn't going to be easy to deal with. She can help you, Lieutenant Hart said, still gripping the table, his white knuckles the only sign that he was nervous about what Carrie was telling him. God knows I can't help much. I'm only a cop. It's a help to talk to you, Dad. That embarrassed his father. He pushed himself up, groaning from the pain in his back. I gotta get going. Take care, and go see Dr. Kessel. Yeah, right. Bye. Lieutenant Hart started out the door, then stopped. The boys at the lab went over the car, he said with a frown. They didn't find much, no prints or anything. The tires were cut with some sort of hunting knife, and the windows, a hammer of some kind was used on them, a soft hammer, like a mallet. Any of your friends walk around with hunting knives and a mallet? Carrie smiled. I'll keep an eye out. You do that. Any more weird phone calls? Should he tell him about Donald? No. Something kept him from saying it. No calls. Must have been a wrong number, right? Right, Dad. Must have been a lot of wrong numbers. The week went by quickly. It was a short week since there'd been no school on Monday. Carrie felt calmer, having talked to Dr. Kessel. She urged him to tell his father about Donald's phone call, but he hadn't done it yet. He kept expecting to see Donald every time he turned a corner, every time he returned home, but there was no trace of him. He spoke to Mandy a few times on the phone. Each time she seemed preoccupied and eager to get off. He asked if she still thought she was being followed, and she said yes. Maybe you should call the police, Carrie had suggested. Oh, that's very helpful, she had replied angrily. Shall we do something this weekend? He asked. Maybe. Her voice was flat, bored. The phone rang once late at night. He picked it up, filled with the dread he had become accustomed to. But it was only a wrong number. Someone asking for Carlos. Thanks for calling, he had said, feeling relieved. Friday night. Everyone was going out but him. I'm gone, Sean said, giving him a wave, his overnight bag in his other hand. Where are you going? Carrie asked. But Sean was out the door. He was going to see that friend of his who lives upstate. You know, the one with the horses. Sean didn't tell him much about his friends. Sean didn't tell him much, period. Where's my cap? His father grumbled. Why can't I ever find my cap? Maybe you should have 2 caps, Carrie suggested. You'd stand a better chance that way. A cop with 2 caps. That would shake up the whole department, his father chuckled. It would be a major advance in police science. He searched the living room until he found it, tucked between the cushions on the worn green sofa. He placed it carefully on his head and started to the door. Hey, Dad. Yeah? Something I didn't tell you, Carrie said softly. You had that look on your face, Lieutenant Hart said, coming back into the room, leaning on the sofa back. Donald called a few days ago. Lieutenant Hart didn't look surprised, didn't change his blank expression. I thought he might. What'd he say? I didn't give him a chance, Carrie admitted, embarrassed. I got so nervous, I accidentally hung up on him. And he didn't call back? No, So what'd he say? His father repeated, looking into Carrie's eyes, trying to find more of the story there, just like a cop. He said, "Be careful, I'm coming." Carrie shrugged. His father finally showed some emotion. He turned his thin white lips down in a frown and shook his head sadly. I was afraid of this, he said quietly, so quietly Carrie could barely hear him. All those months in the hospital. Carrie couldn't decide whether to tell him about Mandy or her feeling that Donald was following her. He decided not to. Why get her involved? Listen, Carrie, Lieutenant Hart was thinking hard. I really don't want to leave you alone here tonight. Why, Dad? You don't think Donald wants to hurt me, do you? Carrie said, finding it hard to even say those unthinkable words. His own brother? I don't know. I really don't, Lieutenant Hart said, fiddling with the brim of his cap. You said you got your memory back. Do you remember what happened after the accident? Carrie stared back at his father. After the accident? No, nothing. Dad, tell me, he said finally. You've got to now. You've got no choice. Lieutenant Hart considered this for a long time, staring down at the green couch, shaking his head. When he looked up, he looked 100 years old. Carrie, your brother tried to kill you. After the accident, Carrie went berserk, Lieutenant Hart said in a flat, emotionless policeman's tone. He just lost control, I guess. When we came to the scene, he had dragged you out of the car. He was shaking you, choking you, screaming at the top of his lungs. That's why Donald was sent away, Carrie. It took 3 men to pull him off you. 3 men. But he didn't know what he was doing, right? Carrie said through his shock, through his sorrow. The question seemed to catch his father by surprise. Well, I guess you could say that. He was definitely out of his mind. So he didn't really know what he was doing? He didn't really know it was me or anything, right? The hatred was still there, Carrie. The fury was still there. His hands were around your throat. Carrie stared at his father. There didn't seem to be anything more to say. He had it now, the missing piece. He didn't want it, but he had it. I didn't want to tell you, Lieutenant Hart said, still gripping the back of the sofa. I never wanted to tell you. They stared at each other for a long while. The room seemed to grow dark even though the lights were on. I've got to go, Lieutenant Hart said finally. I don't want to leave you here tonight, but I have no choice. Listen, Care, lock all the doors after I leave. I'm going to call McCarty and see that a patrol car goes by here every 15 minutes. This house will be under watch. You should be okay if Donald... I'll be okay, Carrie said, his voice nearly a whisper. If you hear or see anything, call the station immediately. Hear? Right, Dad. And listen, don't go out. I mean that. Stay here. Stay locked up. Your brother may not mean you any harm, but we don't know for sure. I'll make sure that patrol car is around here all the time. So just stay put, okay? Okay, Dad. Carrie sounded annoyed. I'll be fine. Fine. I'll pull a Sean tonight. I'll lie here and watch some old sitcoms. You do that, Lieutenant Hart said. He finally let go of the sofa. He turned and disappeared out the front door. Hey, lock up, he called from outside. Shaking his head, Carrie walked to the front door and locked it. Then he walked through the kitchen and locked the back door. Somehow, the fact that his father was more upset than he was cheered him. He knew it would be a long night. He knew he'd jump every time a twig cracked outside the house, but he just couldn't picture it. He just couldn't picture his brother coming back to kill him. Not Donald. Not good-natured, fun-loving Donald. Not his brother. Still, he locked the windows and pulled the shades. The back of his neck felt tight and stiff. He felt a little dizzy. He realized his heart was pounding. Yes, it would be a long night. What was that noise? Something scrabbled across the roof. A squirrel? He held his breath and listened. Silence. I'd better put on some music or something, he thought. I need some noise around here. Something squeaked. He jumped. It was just the floor beneath his sneakers. Oh boy, was it going to be a long night. When the phone rang, he nearly jumped out of his sneakers. His throat tightened. He didn't know if he could answer it. Was it Donald? Was it a call from the girl who was threatening to break his bones? He decided not to answer it. It rang and rang. He couldn't keep to his resolve. He picked it up. Carrie? It's me, Mandy. Oh, hi, Mandy. I'm so glad. Carrie, you've got to help me. I'm so frightened. It's Donald. I think he's here. In the house. Please, Carrie. Please.